And now, aviation weather around Alaska. Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan, and we're going to look at the Alaska aviation weather coming up here as we go through midweek. Starting out on Wednesday morning, we're going to have an area of low pressure entering the Gulf, and this low itself, as far as the central pressure, is not all that deep, generally above 990 millibars, but it will have some stronger winds associated with an occluded front that will be working up into the north central Gulf, along with widespread areas of moderate to locally heavy rain. Some heavier rains will be developing, especially along the northeastern Gulf Coast into the Panhandle as we go into Wednesday evening, Wednesday night, and into Thursday. Further west, IFR conditions along the Arctic coast from Utqiagvik down into the western Brooks, into the western interior around the Seward Peninsula, extending off of the southwest coast around the YK deltas and down to near Bristol Bay. By Wednesday afternoon, we see an increase in IFR conditions there along the northern Gulf up into the coastal interior mountains, Wrangell, St. Elias. But again, there'll be a development of some heavier rainfall around Yakutat, and that'll spread southeastward as we go through Wednesday night and early Thursday morning. Further west, widespread MVFR conditions across much of the central western mainland, with IFR persisting along the northwestern Arctic coast from especially northeast there at Point Hope on toward Wainwright and Utqiagvik. For Thursday morning, widespread IFR across the Panhandle, northern Gulf Coast, extending up to along areas of the Alaska Range as we have that moisture being pulled back westward in the circulation around the low. Also, there'll be some stronger winds along the northern Gulf Coast, especially Wednesday afternoon into early Thursday. Some of those winds will be gale to near storm force gust, which will cause turbulence. And by Thursday afternoon, we still have IFR conditions persisting there across a good portion of the Panhandle and up into the southeast corner of the state there, just to the west of Yakutat. IFR conditions spread a little further eastward along the Arctic coast from near Deadhorse to Kaktovik. And then the next weather system by Thursday afternoon, a little stronger low down around 980 millibars, will be in the southwest corner of the Bering, with a frontal system extending out ahead of it. And along this frontal band, we do expect IFR conditions that will go through the central Bering down into the central Aleutians, along with some gale force winds, maybe some storm force gust as well around that low. So the passes coming up here for Wednesday, Anaktuvik Pass and Adigan Pass up there in the central Brooks Range will generally see MVFR conditions throughout the day. As we drop southwestward down toward the western arm of the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill socked in with IFR conditions the better part of Wednesday, though the bulk of the rain will be moving through during the morning hours, and certainly snow in the higher elevations this time of year. Rainy Pass IFR on Wednesday, and as we go to Windy Pass, there's a possibility that it may just stay MVFR throughout the day, but I would advise IFR conditions will be on either side of that pass, and certainly it could fill in there on Wednesday, especially in the morning. Isabel Pass also generally MVFR conditions, but south and west of there I do anticipate IFR conditions on Wednesday. Mentasta Pass will start out with VFR conditions in the morning, giving way to MVFR conditions as some of that moisture from the Gulf system gets further north and east. Tanita Pass, generally MVFR conditions are anticipated Wednesday, but again, either side of there could be some IFR conditions. And Portage Pass will start out IFR, especially the eastern half of the pass, extending out over Prince William Sound. But later in the day, as we go through the later half of the afternoon, probably trying to lift back up to MVFR. And then finally, in the far northern end of the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White will see MVFR conditions deteriorate to IFR conditions, especially by afternoon, as that frontal band pushes up into the northeastern Gulf Coast and into the Panhandle, which will bring areas of heavier rainfall along coastal areas, but snow in through the mountains. Freezing levels early Wednesday morning will be below freezing in the surface across a good area of the interior, northwest Canada, also back toward eastern Russia. Freezing levels aloft will be highest in advance of the low pressure system here in the Western Gulf. We expect freezing levels generally above 8,000 and 10,000 feet out over the Gulf early Wednesday morning. Back to the west, colder, lower freezing levels, 2,000 feet, dipping down into the northern Bering to near St. Matthew, and freezing levels generally below 4,000 feet across much of the central eastern Aleutians and tip of the Alaska Peninsula. The greatest threat for icing on Wednesday will be along areas of the interior. Above 5,000 feet, there could be some considerable moderate icing, as well as above 6,000 feet here along the Alaska Range and in through parts of the southwest interior. And then in advance of the front, above 10,000 feet, as the areas of precipitation will be expanding there as we go through Wednesday afternoon and evening, with the heaviest precipitation setting up here along the north central Gulf Coast, spreading southeastward Wednesday night into early Thursday. And then way out toward the western Bering, we find there is warmer air along and just west of the western Aleutians. So freezing levels there above 8,000 feet, the greatest threat of icing above that level. Upper level jet stream winds at 30,000 feet, roughly 300 millibars. We find a big trough over the mainland, dipping down into the Alaska Peninsula, North Pacific. Ahead of it, 130, 140 knot southwesterly jet core, pushing up into the northern Gulf. This is helping to transport a lot of moisture. In fact, an atmospheric river will be feeding the heavier rainfall along the coast as we go into Wednesday afternoon and evening. On the backside of the trough, we find winds of 110 to 130 knots. They're south of the eastern and central Aleutians on the backside of the trough. At 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, a broad area of 40 to as high as 60 knot southwesterly flow out over the northern Gulf in through the Panhandle. This again is the focus of that river of moisture that will be providing the heavier precipitation for the second half of Wednesday into Wednesday night and early Thursday. Back to the west, next system coming in to the southwest corner of the Bering Sea, widespread 40 to 50 knot winds. And then on Wednesday itself, we will find the strongest winds out over the southeastern Gulf, anywhere from 45 to 55 knots, and even a belt of pretty strong winds along the north central Gulf Coast in the circulation around the surface low. And then behind me, along the frontal system that'll be associated with that other low that's emerging into the southwestern Bering Sea, we do expect 45 to 65 knot winds along this front. So at 3,000 feet, obviously at the surface, at the sea surface there, we will have gale to storm force winds associated with that system by the time we get into especially later Wednesday and during the day on Thursday. And a quick check of turbulence. Greatest threat for some isolated severe turbulence will be along the north central Gulf on Wednesday, especially from Cape Suckling on over towards Seal Island outside of Hinchinbrook entrance. Turbulence there surfaced to 6,000 feet, also extending up to near the entrance of Cook Inlet up to Lake Iliamna. And then we have pockets of moderate turbulence possible along the western Seward Peninsula, parts of the some of the higher terrain and coming in off of Kuskokwim Bay as we go in Wednesday afternoon. And then further west, a broad area of moderate turbulence possible from the tip of the Alaska Peninsula through the eastern Aleutians, and then also back toward the western Aleutians, generally surface to 3,000 feet.